The transport ship shook as it broke through the thick clouds of Kepler 442b. Jake Morrison pressed his face against the small window and watched the endless green jungle spread out below. The trees looked like a giant carpet that went on forever. Somewhere down there, he would have to survive for 3 days while being hunted. Jake rubbed his hands together and tried to stay calm. He was the only human on this ship. The other passengers looked nothing like him. There was a tall bug-like creature with 4 arms and shiny black skin. It kept clicking its mouth parts and staring at Jake with its large compound eyes. The nameplate on its chest read Zeekthi of the Zenthari. Next to the bug alien sat something that looked like a lizard walking on 2 legs. Its skin changed colors every few seconds, shifting from green to brown to gray. Jake had heard about these shapeshifters before. They were called Velkans, and this one was named Corvin. According to the display above its seat, the strangest passenger was just a ball of blue light that floated in the air. It pulsed and flickered like a flame, but Jake could feel intelligence behind that glow. The light spoke without a mouth, its voice echoing inside everyone's head. It called itself Nexara and said it was from the Corvani people. "Welcome, test." "Subjects," came a cold voice from the ship's speakers. A tall gray alien walked into the passenger area. It had no hair and large black eyes that seemed to look right through Jake. "I am Administrator Vexstar of the Galactic Council. You are about to participate in the Predator Evasion test." Jake straightened up in his seat. He had trained for this moment his whole life. The Marines had taught him how to survive in any environment, but this was different. This was an alien world with creatures that could kill him in seconds. "Each of you represents your species," Vexstar continued. "The test is simple. Survive for 72 hours on the surface while our hunters track you. The jungle below contains many dangerous predators. Most test subjects do not survive the first day." The bug alien Zeekthi made a chittering sound that Jake guessed was laughter. "My people have natural camouflage. This test will be easy." The lizard shapeshifter Corvin nodded. "Velkans have survived by adapting for millions of years. We can become anything we need to be." The floating ball of light, Nexara, pulsed brighter. "Energy beings do not fear physical threats. I can phase through any attack." All 3 aliens looked at Jake with what he thought might be pity. He was just a human with soft skin and no special powers. Vexstar's black eyes also focused on him. "The human representative," Vexstar said with a tone that suggested Jake was already dead. "Your species is known for using crude tools and brute force. This test requires more sophisticated abilities." Jake stood up and walked to the equipment locker. Inside were his supplies: a simple knife, water purification tablets, a small medical kit, and his military uniform. The other aliens had brought nothing because they did not need tools. "I will survive," Jake said quietly. "Humans are good at that." Zeekthi's compound eyes glittered. "You have no cloaking device, no energy shields, no quantum displacement technology. What makes you think you can compete with us?" Jake picked up his knife and tested the blade. It was sharp and well-balanced. "Because I do not need those things." The ship landed with a thud that shook everyone inside. Through the windows, Jake could see the jungle was even thicker than it had looked from above. Massive trees with twisted branches blocked out most of the sunlight. Strange sounds echoed from the dark spaces between the trunks. "The test begins now," Vexstar announced. "You have 5 minutes to leave the ship before our hunters are released. Remember, they are equipped with the most advanced tracking technology. In the galaxy, they will find you." The aliens rushed toward the exit. Zeekthi activated some kind of device that made the air shimmer around him. Then he seemed to fade until Jake could barely see him. Corvin's skin shifted and changed, until he looked exactly like the bark of a nearby tree. Nexara simply winked out of existence, becoming completely invisible. Jake walked slowly to the ship's exit. The humid air hit him like a wall when he stepped outside. The jungle smelled of rotting leaves and something else he could not identify. Somewhere in the distance, he heard a roar that made his blood run cold, while the other aliens disappeared into the jungle using their advanced abilities. Jake did something different. He knelt down next to a small stream that ran near the landing site. The water was clear, but the bottom was covered with thick, dark mud. Jake scooped up handfuls of the mud and began covering his arms and face. The mud was cool and smooth. It mixed with his sweat and spread easily across his skin. He had done this before during survival training in the swamps of Louisiana. "What are you doing?" Vexstar asked from the ship's doorway. The administrator looked confused. "Getting ready," Jake replied. He continued coating himself with mud, making sure to cover every inch of exposed skin. The mud would hide his scent and mask his body heat. More importantly, it would help him blend into the jungle environment. A deep horn sound echoed across the jungle. The test had officially begun. Jake could hear the hum of flying machines in the distance. The hunters were coming as the other test subjects had already vanished. Jake looked around the jungle with new eyes. He did not see threats everywhere, like the others probably did. Instead, he saw a living system that he could become part of. The mud on his skin was already drying, creating a natural camouflage that no technology could match. Jake Morrison, former Marine and survival expert, disappeared into the jungle. But unlike the others who had used advanced technology to hide, Jake simply became part of the world around him. He moved like the animals moved, breathed like the jungle breathed, and thought like prey thinks. The real test was about to begin. Jake moved through the jungle like a ghost. The mud on his skin had dried into a hard shell that cracked when he bent his arms. He stopped every few steps to listen to the sounds around him. The jungle was alive with noises he had never heard. Before high above, something with leathery wings screamed as it flew between the trees. Jake pressed himself against a thick trunk and stayed perfectly still. The creature sounded hungry and angry. He did not want to meet it face to face. After the flying thing passed, Jake continued deeper into the jungle. He moved slowly and carefully, testing each step before putting his full weight down. The ground was covered with twisted roots and fallen branches that could snap and give away his position. The first thing Jake needed was water. He had purification tablets, but they were useless without a source. He followed the sound of running water until he found a small stream. The water looked clean, but Jake knew better than to trust appearances on an alien world. As he knelt by the stream to fill his water bottle, Jake heard something moving in the bushes nearby. He froze with the bottle half full and listened. The sound came again, closer this time. Something was walking through the underbrush with heavy steps. Jake slowly turned his head and saw something that made his heart stop. A creature the size of a small truck was pushing through the trees about 50 feet away. It had 6 legs and the body covered in thick black fur. Its head was long and narrow, with a mouthful of teeth that looked like knives. The creature stopped and sniffed the air. Jake could see its nostrils flaring as it tried to catch a scent. This had to be one of the Ravagers that Vexstar had mentioned. Jake remembered the administrator saying they were the apex predators of this world. Jake did not move. He barely breathed. The mud covering his body had hidden his human scent, but any sudden movement would give him away. The Ravager's 6 legs made it incredibly stable as it moved through the jungle, and Jake knew he could never outrun it. The creature took another step closer. Jake could see its yellow eyes scanning the area where he knelt. Those eyes were intelligent and patient. This was not just a mindless beast. It was a hunter that knew how to wait. Then Jake remembered something from his training. When facing a predator, do not act like prey, but also do not act like a threat. Act like you belong in their world. Act like you are part of their environment. Jake slowly reached down and scooped up more mud from the stream bank. Moving as smoothly as possible, he spread the fresh mud over his dried coating. The movement was so slow and natural that it looked like water flowing over rocks. The Ravager watched him, but did not attack. To the creature, Jake looked like just another part of the jungle, a muddy rock by the stream. Nothing worth investigating. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, the Ravager lost interest and moved away. Jake waited until he could no longer hear its footsteps before he allowed himself to breathe normally. As Jake continued through the jungle, he began to understand how the ecosystem worked. The Ravagers were the top predators, but they were not the only dangerous creatures. Small things with poisonous stings lived in the flowers. Snake-like creatures hung from branches and dropped onto anything that walked beneath them. But Jake also noticed something else. The jungle had its own rhythm. The predators hunted at certain times and rested at others. The smaller animals had learned to move when it was safe and hide when it was not. If Jake could learn this rhythm, he could survive. He found a thick cluster of bushes where he could rest and observe. From his hiding spot, Jake watched the jungle come alive as the day progressed. Flying creatures came out to hunt insects. Ground animals emerged to feed on fallen fruit. Everything had its place, and time. Jake was studying the pattern of animal movement when he heard the first scream. It came from somewhere to the north, where he had last seen the bug alien Ziekthi. The scream was high-pitched and full of pain. It ended abruptly. Through the trees, Jake could see flashes of light and hear the sound of energy weapons firing. The hunters had found their first target. Jake felt sorry for Ziekthi, but the bug alien's death taught him something important. Advanced technology was not enough to survive here. Jake remembered how confident Ziekthi had been about his natural camouflage. But the Ravagers had other senses besides sight. They could detect vibrations in the ground, changes in air pressure, and probably many other things that cloaking devices could not hide. As the sounds of battle faded, Jake heard the mechanical hunters moving through the jungle. They made a low humming sound as they flew between the trees. Jake pressed himself deeper into the bushes and covered his face with fresh mud. The hunters passed overhead without stopping. Their sensors were looking for energy signatures, heat, patterns, and technological devices. Jake's mud coating had cooled his body temperature to match the jungle floor. His knife was simple steel that gave off no electronic signals. To the hunters, he was invisible. But Jake knew the real test was still coming. The other aliens would be harder to catch than Ziekthi had been. The shapeshifter Corvan could look like anything, and the energy being Nexara could phase through. Solid matter. The hunters would adapt their methods as the test continued. Jake also knew that the jungle itself would become more dangerous as time passed. The predators would be disturbed by all the noise and activity. They would be more aggressive and less predictable. He needed to find a better hiding place before night fell. As Jake prepared to move to a new location, he thought about what made humans different from the other species in the test. The aliens all had special abilities that made them superior to humans in obvious ways. But humans had survived on Earth not because they were the strongest or fastest. They had survived because they could adapt to any environment and learn from their mistakes. Jake Morrison was about to prove that sometimes the oldest survival skills were better than the newest technology. He was going to show the galaxy that humans were the ultimate survivors, not because of what they could do, but because of how they could think. The jungle was dangerous, but it was also home to countless creatures that had learned to survive here. Jake was going to learn from them. He was going to become part of their world, and in doing so, He would show everyone what it really meant to be human. The test was far from over, but Jake was no longer afraid. He was exactly where he belonged. The second day began with the sound of machines. Jake woke up in his hiding place, among the thick roots of a massive tree. The humming noise was different from yesterday. These were not the same hunters that had killed Zeekthi. These were something new. Jake peered through the branches and saw metal shapes moving through the jungle. They were about the size of a person, but moved like spiders, with long, thin legs that could step over fallen logs and thick undergrowth. Their bodies glowed with a soft blue light, and Jake could see sensors spinning on their heads. These were the advanced hunter drones that Vextar had mentioned. Jake watched one pass close to his hiding spot. It stopped every few feet to scan the area with beams of light. The beams passed right through leaves and branches, looking for something hidden beneath. Jake pressed himself deeper into the mud. At the base of the tree, his coating had been refreshed during the night with fresh earth and crushed leaves. Now he smelled like the jungle floor. The drone's scanning beam passed over him twice, but detected nothing unusual. After the drone moved on, Jake carefully climbed higher into the tree. From his new position, he could see more of the jungle. The drones were everywhere, moving in a search pattern that covered every inch of ground. They were systematic and patient, unlike the flying hunters from yesterday. Jake also saw something else that made his heart race. About a mile away, there was a commotion near a rocky cliff. Energy blasts were lighting up the morning sky, and Jake could hear the sound of something large crashing through the trees. The shapeshifter Corvin was in trouble. Through the trees, Jake caught glimpses of the battle. Corvin kept changing shape, trying to confuse the hunters. He became a tree, then a rock, then a flying creature. But the new drones were too smart. They had learned to detect the energy signature that all Velkins gave off when they shapeshifted. The battle ended when Corvan made a mistake. He turned into a large predator and tried to attack one of the drones. The moment he became aggressive, every hunter in the area focused on him. Jake heard the shapeshifter's final scream echo across the jungle. Now only Jake and the energy being Nexara were left. Two very different survivors using completely different methods to stay alive. Jake wondered where the floating ball of light was hiding and how long it could avoid the hunter's dot as Jake climbed down from the tree. He noticed something important about the drones. They followed predictable patterns. They moved in straight lines and turned at regular intervals. They were machines, which meant they thought like machines. Jake could use that against them. Jake began to move in ways that would confuse the drone's programming. Instead of walking in straight lines, he followed the curved paths that animals used. Instead of moving at a steady speed, he stopped and started like a creature that was feeding or resting. The drone's sensors were designed to detect purposeful movement, not the random patterns of jungle life. But Jake's biggest advantage was still the mud. He had discovered that the local clay contained minerals that interfered with the drone's sensors. When he coated himself with fresh mud from certain areas, he became almost invisible to their scanning beams. Jake spent the morning mapping the drone's patrol routes. He found gaps in their coverage and learned to time his movements to slip through, undetected. It was like a deadly game of chess, where one wrong move would mean death. Around midday, Jake encountered his first major challenge. A group of 3 drones had cornered him near a steep ravine. Their scanning beams were getting closer, and Jake had nowhere to run. The ravine was too deep to jump, and climbing down would take too long. Jake looked around desperately and saw a family of small monkey-like creatures watching him from the trees. They seemed curious, but not afraid. Jake realized that the drones must not see these animals as threats. They were just part of the jungle background. Jake made a decision that would have seemed crazy to anyone watching. He sat down on the ground and began to act like the monkey creatures. He scratched himself, looked around randomly, and made small chittering sounds. He moved his hands the way the monkeys moved theirs, quick and jerky. The drones scanning beams passed over him repeatedly, but their programming classified him as native wildlife. To the machines, Jake was just another jungle animal that belonged in this environment. They moved on without giving him a second look. After the drones left, Jake continued his journey through the jungle. He was getting better at reading the signs of danger. He could tell when predators were nearby by the way other animals behaved. He could predict where the hunter drones would search next by understanding their programming. But the most important thing Jake learned was how to think. Like prey, predators looked for certain behaviors: running, hiding, fighting. But prey animals did something different. They blended in. They became part of the environment. They survived by not being noticed rather than by being strong. Jake found a stream and refreshed his mud coating. As he worked, he thought about the energy being Nexara. The floating ball of light had been quiet all day. That was either very good or very bad. Either Nexara had found the perfect hiding place, or the hunters had already caught him. Jake got his answer an hour later when he heard a sound like thunder rolling across the jungle. In the distance, he could see bright flashes of light shooting up into the sky. The hunters had found Nexara and were using some kind of containment field to trap him. The battle was fierce but brief. The energy being could phase through solid matter, but the hunters had come prepared. They used energy nets that could hold even a creature made of pure light. Jake watched the flashes fade and knew that he was now the only test subject left alive. Being alone changed everything. Now all the hunters would focus on finding him. The drones would search more carefully. The flying hunters would scan every inch of the jungle. Jake was no longer just another target. He was the target. But Jake also realized something else. Being human was not a weakness in this test. It was his greatest strength. The other aliens had relied on abilities that made them superior to humans in obvious ways. But those same abilities made them stand out. They made them different from the natural world around them. Jake was just a human with mud on his skin and a knife in his hand. He was not faster than the local animals. He was not stronger than the predators. He was not more advanced than the hunters. But he was something that none of them were. He was adaptable. As the sun began to set on the second day, Jake prepared for the most dangerous part of the test. The hunters would be more aggressive now that they only had one target. The jungle predators would be more active in the darkness. And Jake would have to survive it all with nothing but his wits and his will to live. But for the first time since the test began, Jake felt confident. He was no longer fighting against the jungle. He was part of it, and that made him the most dangerous creature on the planet. The third day brought something Jake had not expected. The jungle fell silent. No birds sang in the trees. No insects buzzed in the flowers. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Something was coming that scared every living thing on the planet. Jake crouched in his hiding place and watched the sky. Dark clouds were gathering, but that was not what worried him. The animals were acting strange. The small creatures had disappeared entirely. The larger predators were moving away from the area, abandoning their territories without a fight. Then Jake heard it. A sound like metal grinding against metal, mixed with something organic and wet. It was coming from the direction of the landing site, moving slowly through the jungle. Whatever was making that sound was big and heavy and wrong. Jake climbed carefully to the top of a tall tree to get a better view. What he saw made his blood freeze. Moving through the jungle was a creature that should not exist. It was part machine and part living tissue, about the size of a small building. Its body was covered in both metal armor and what looked like skin that pulsed with its own heartbeat. The thing had multiple arms that ended in different tools. Some were weapons that glowed with energy. Others were sensors that swiveled and scanned everything around them. But the worst part was its head. It had the face of a predator, but the eyes were mechanical and cold. Jake realized this was the Council's final test. They had released something that combined the best of both technology and biology. This hunter could adapt to any situation because it was both machine and living creature. It could think like a computer and hunt like an animal. The biomechanical hunter moved through the jungle with purpose. It was not searching randomly like the drones had been. It was following a trail. Jake's trail. Somehow, this thing had found traces of his passage that even the advanced sensors had missed. Jake slid down from the tree and began to move as quietly as possible. He needed to put distance between himself and the hunter, but he also needed to think. Running would only make it easier for the creature to track him. He needed a different strategy. As Jake moved through the jungle, he noticed something about the hunter's movement pattern. It was very efficient, but also very predictable. The creature moved in straight lines toward its target, crushing everything in its path. It was not trying to be stealthy, because it did not need to be. It was the apex predator of apex predators. But that gave Jake an idea. The hunter was so focused on being the ultimate predator that it had forgotten the most important rule of survival. Every predator has prey, but every predator can also become prey under the right circumstances. Jake changed direction and headed toward the most dangerous part of the jungle. He had avoided this area for 2 days because it was where the largest native predators lived. The thornback stalkers were massive creatures that even the ravagers feared. They were slow but incredibly strong, with armor-like skin that could stop most weapons. Jake found what he was looking for in a clearing, where several thornback stalkers were resting. The creatures were about the size of elephants, but built like armored tanks. Their backs were covered in thick plates that looked like stone, and their heads were protected by horn-like projections. The thornback stalkers were not aggressive unless threatened, but they were fiercely territorial. Anything that entered their space without permission would be attacked by the entire group. Jake was counting on that territorial instinct to help him. Jake began to lay a trail that would lead the biomechanical hunter directly into the thornback stalker's territory. He used his own scent, disturbed vegetation, and even small pieces of his clothing to create a path that the hunter could not ignore. Then Jake did something that required all of his courage. He entered the thornback stalker's clearing and began to move among them like he belonged there. He copied their slow, deliberate movements. He made soft sounds that mimicked their communication calls. Most importantly, he showed no fear. The thornback stalkers watched Jake with curiosity, but did not attack. To them, he was just another creature sharing their space. His mud coating made him smell like the jungle, and his behavior was non-threatening. After a few minutes, they went back to their resting. Jake positioned himself on the far side of the clearing and waited. The grinding, mechanical sound was getting louder. The biomechanical hunter was following his trail exactly as he had hoped. In a few minutes, it would burst into the clearing full of sleeping giants. When the hunter finally appeared, it was even more terrifying up close. Jake could see where metal joined with living tissue, creating something that was neither fully artificial nor fully organic. The creature's sensors locked onto Jake immediately, and it began to move toward him with deadly purpose. But the hunter had made a crucial mistake. It had entered the thornback stalker's territory without permission. The moment the mechanical creature stepped into the clearing, every stalker in the area rose to their feet and turned toward the intruder. What followed was a battle that shook the entire jungle. The biomechanical hunter was incredibly advanced, but it was still just one creature. The thornback stalkers attacked as a group, using their massive size and armored bodies to overwhelm their opponent. The hunter fought back with energy weapons and mechanical arms, but the stalker's armor was too thick to penetrate easily. Meanwhile, Jake slipped away from the battle and moved to a safe distance where he could watch the outcome. The fight lasted for over an hour. The hunter was skilled and powerful, but the stalkers were relentless. They used their numbers and their knowledge of the terrain to their advantage. When the battle finally ended, the biomechanical hunter was badly damaged and lying motionless in the clearing. But Jake knew the test was not over yet. The hunter was hurt, but not destroyed. Its self-repair systems were already working to fix the damage. Jake had bought himself time, but he needed to use it wisely. Jake approached the fallen hunter carefully. Its sensors were still active, but they were focused on repairing internal damage rather than scanning for threats. Jake realized this was his chance to turn the hunter's own technology against it. Using his knife, Jake carefully removed one of the hunter's sensor arrays. The device was small, but incredibly sophisticated. It was designed to track energy signatures and biological markers. Jake studied it for a few minutes, then began to modify it using materials from the jungle. Jake attached pieces of the hunter's own technology to his body using plant fibers and mud. The sensors would broadcast the hunter's own energy signature, making Jake appear to be part of the damaged creature. It was a desperate gamble, but it might work. When the hunter finally repaired itself and stood up, its sensors detected what appeared to be a piece of itself moving through the jungle. The creature's programming was confused by the conflicting signals. It knew something was wrong, but it could not identify the threat. Jake moved carefully away from the clearing, still broadcasting the hunter's energy signature. The creature followed, but it was moving slowly and uncertainly. Its sensors were telling it that the target was nearby, but they were also telling it that the target was itself. As the final hours of the test approached, Jake prepared for his most desperate gamble yet. He was going to do something that no one would expect. He was going to hunt the hunter, and he was going to do it using the oldest human survival skill of all, the ability to think like both predator and prey at the same time. The test was almost over, but the real challenge was just beginning. The final hours of the test were the most dangerous. Jake knew that the council would not let him win easily. They would send everything they had to find him before time ran out. The damaged biomechanical hunter was still tracking him, but now it was moving differently. It was angry and desperate. Jake could hear the creature crashing through the jungle behind him. It was no longer trying to be efficient or quiet. It was destroying everything in its path, hoping to flush Jake out of hiding. Trees fell with loud crashes, and the ground shook with each of the hunter's heavy steps. But Jake had learned something important during his time in the jungle. Anger made predators sloppy. When they got frustrated, they made mistakes. The biomechanical hunter was incredibly advanced, but it was still following predictable patterns. It was still thinking like a machine, even with its biological components. Jake decided to use the hunter's anger against it. He began to leave more obvious signs of his passage. A footprint in soft mud here, a broken branch there. He was creating a trail that the hunter could follow easily, but he was also leading it toward another trap. The trap was not another group of native predators. This time, Jake was going to use the jungle itself as a weapon. He had noticed that certain areas of the forest were unstable. Heavy rains had weakened the soil, and large trees were ready to fall. Jake just needed to find the right trigger. Jake found what he was looking for near a steep hillside. A massive tree that had stood for centuries was slowly dying. Its roots were loose in the wet soil, and its trunk was cracked from age and disease. It would take very little to bring the giant down. Jake positioned himself on the far side of the tree and began to make noise. He broke branches and threw rocks to attract the hunter's attention. The creature took the bait and came crashing through the forest toward the sound. When the biomechanical hunter reached the dying tree, It did exactly what Jake had hoped it would do. It tried to go through the obstacle rather than around it. The creature's mechanical arms began to tear at the trunk, trying to clear a path, but the tree was bigger and heavier than the hunter had calculated. When it finally fell, it did not fall alone. The impact triggered a small landslide that brought down several other trees and tons of loose soil. The biomechanical hunter was buried under a mountain of wood and earth. Jake waited to make sure the creature was truly trapped before he allowed himself to relax. He could hear mechanical sounds from beneath the pile of debris, but they were getting weaker. The hunter was still alive, but it would take hours to dig itself out. With only minutes left in the test, Jake faced his final challenge. He could hear the sound of transport ships approaching through the clouds above. The council was coming to collect the survivors, but Jake was not sure they would be happy to find him alive. Jake made his way back toward the original landing site, moving carefully through the jungle he now knew so well. The mud on his skin had been refreshed so many times that it felt like a second skin. He moved like the animals moved, thought like the jungle thought, and breathed like the forest breathed. When Jake reached the clearing where the test had begun, he found Administrator Vexstar waiting with a group of other council members. They were all staring at their scanning devices with expressions of confusion and disbelief. "The human life sign disappeared 6 hours ago," one of them was saying. "All our sensors show the same thing. The test subject is dead." Jake stepped out of the tree line and walked toward the group. His mud coating was so complete that he looked like a walking piece of the jungle itself. The council members did not notice him until he was only a few feet away. "I am not dead," Jake said quietly. "I am right here." The aliens jumped back in surprise. Their sensors had been scanning the area for hours, but they had not detected Jake's presence. To their technology, he had become invisible by becoming part of the natural world. Vexstar stared at Jake with his large black eyes. "Impossible. Our sensors are the most advanced in the galaxy. They can detect any known life form." Jake smiled and wiped some of the mud from his face. "Your sensors look for what they expect to find. They look for energy signatures, heat patterns, and technological devices. They do not look for someone who has learned to become part of the environment." The other council members began to examine their equipment, convinced that something was wrong with their instruments. But Vexstar was smarter than the others. He understood what had happened. "You did not hide from the jungle," Vexstar said slowly. "You became part of it. You learned to think like the native creatures and move like they move. You survived by adapting rather than by fighting." Jake nodded. The other test subjects tried to use their advanced abilities to overcome the challenges of this world. "But I used the oldest human survival skill. I learned to fit in rather than stand out." A younger council member stepped forward. "But you are just a primitive human. You have no natural camouflage, no shape-shifting abilities, no energy manipulation powers. How could you succeed where superior species failed?" Jake looked at the alien and saw the same arrogance that had killed the other test subjects. "Because being superior is not the same as being adaptable. Your advanced species became so specialized that they forgot how to be flexible. Humans survived on Earth because we could adapt to any environment and learn from any situation." Vexstar activated his communication device. "Council command, this is Administrator Vexstar. The Predator evasion test is complete. We have one survivor." The human, the voice that came back through the device, sounded shocked. "Confirmed. The human Jake Morrison has survived the full 72-hour test period. All other test subjects have been eliminated." Jake looked up at the sky as more transport ships began to descend through the clouds. Soon, representatives from dozens of worlds would arrive to hear about the test results. They would want to know how a primitive human had defeated their most advanced species. But Jake already knew what he would tell them. As the council ships landed in the clearing, Jake watched dozens of different alien species emerge. Some looked like insects, others like reptiles or energy beings. All of them stared at the muddy human who had somehow survived what their best representatives could not. "How?" asked the tall alien with crystal-like skin. "Our champion was a master of quantum phase technology. He could walk through solid matter. How did your primitive methods defeat our advanced abilities?" Jake sat down on a fallen log and began to clean the mud from his hands. "Your champion thought like a superior being. I thought like prey. When you think you are better than your environment, you try to fight against it. When you know you are part of your environment, you learn to work with it." A floating brain in a glass dome spoke with a voice like static. "But our sensors detected no trace of you for the final 6 hours. Our technology is beyond anything your species possesses. How did you hide from instruments that can see through solid rock?" "I did not hide from your instruments," Jake replied. "I became something your instruments were programmed to ignore. Your sensors look for threats, for technology, for things that do not belong. They do not look for mud and leaves and the smell of the forest floor." Vextar stepped forward and addressed the gathering crowd. "The human succeeded because he understood something we had forgotten. Survival is not about being the strongest or the most advanced. It is about being the most adaptable." An alien that looked like a walking tree made a sound like wind through branches. "But humans are weak. They have no natural weapons, no armor, no special abilities. How can weakness defeat strength?" Jake stood up and faced the crowd. "Because what you call weakness, we call flexibility. We cannot breathe underwater, so we learn to build boats. We cannot fly, so we learn to make wings. We cannot see in the dark, so we learn to make fire. Every limitation forced us to become more creative. Your species developed amazing abilities over millions of years," Jake continued. "But those same abilities became limitations. The shapeshifter could only think about changing form. The energy being could only think about phasing through matter. The insect alien could only think about his natural camouflage. They all became prisoners of their own advantages." A small alien with large eyes raised its hand. "What about the biomechanical hunter? It was designed to be the perfect predator. How did you defeat something that combined the best of technology and biology?" Jake smiled. "I did not defeat it by being stronger or smarter. I defeated it by thinking like prey. Predators follow patterns because patterns work most of the time. But prey animals survive by breaking patterns, by doing the unexpected thing at the right moment. The hunter expected me to run away or hide. Instead, I led it into a fight with creatures that were bigger and stronger than it was. The hunter expected me to avoid its technology. Instead, I used pieces of its own sensors to confuse it. The hunter expected me to be afraid. Instead, I became the thing it was hunting." Vextar looked thoughtful. "You are saying that humans survive by turning their weaknesses into strengths?" "Exactly," Jake replied. "We cannot outrun a predator, so we learn to outlast it. We cannot overpower an enemy, so we learn to outsmart it. We cannot adapt our bodies to new environments, so we learn to adapt our minds instead." The crowd of aliens began to whisper among themselves in dozens of different languages. Jake